Hi, everybody. I'm Merilyn, and I'm an alcoholic.
Amen.
And, I heard something really great yesterday. Maybe all of you have already heard it because I miss out on things from time to time. And this is the simple phrase I heard. God got me to AA, and AA got me to God. I think that's just so simple and so beautiful. It really resonated perfectly with me. And if there's a summary statement for my story, that would be it. So I hope you take that with you. Please don't leave yet. I still have the rest of my story to tell. So I'm really grateful to be here, part of this, my home group. It's really nice to look out and recognize a lot of people. I'm a little disconcerted because I was really getting used to the tables again, and now we're just in rows and, to COVID rows and columns. And soon I guess we'll all be masked up again. I don't know. In general, a lot of you know that my story has been stuttering and faltering. I've had long periods of sobriety interrupted by significant periods of binge or periodic drinking. I'm grateful to say that for the last year and 2 months, nearly, I've been experiencing the best recovery that I've experienced in all the 18 and a half years that I've been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've been a solid member of Alcoholics Anonymous throughout those years. I would dash out the door for a minute, maybe for a week, maybe for two. I'd come crawling right back, knowing that this is really the only place for me, the only place that can save me. So to tell my story, I'm going to start with my childhood. I hear a fair amount of speakers get up and say that childhood was really okay, and they don't think it contributed to their alcoholism. And I wouldn't lay blame on my childhood experiences as the source of my alcoholism, but I do believe they were the source of my inner spiritual maladies, my personal isms that I believe began at a very young age. So I was born into what was, by external appearances, a stable family, a mother, a father. I and my fraternal twin were the youngest of 5 siblings total. So we were a larger sized family. We did ordinary things. It was a really stable community that we grew up in. I knew the same people my entire childhood. Within the home that I was raised in, I changed bedrooms once. That was my big move. Many of you have moved many times, but that was my big childhood move. And fortunately, it was to a nicer bedroom. So that was really an upside. Outside our home, in the community, as I said, things looked pretty good. I think there were a lot of truly stable homes. I know that every home has its fractures, every home has its difficulties, but I believe mine was particularly fraught. My mother was rage-filled, violent, cruel, critical. She was a lot of things that impacted all of her children equally. In fact, if this has any relevance, all of we children ended up with serious alcohol and drug problems. There is some family history of alcoholism in a paternal grandfather and a maternal uncle. So we're not free of a genetic susceptibility, perhaps. But I think it's really significant that there was so much mayhem in the household that it really turned me into a distrustful, fearful, self-loathing kid who lacked confidence, who was painfully self-conscious. I believe this happened to me by the time I was 3 or 4 years old, possibly younger. One thing else that I'll bring up about my childhood home is that we had a Christian home. We went to church on Sunday, and we did middle of the week things, and this was required, at least until you were an adolescent. And what I knew even as a small child was that while I saw some things I liked in church, and I saw some families that seemed really together in church, what I was experiencing in my home was not congruent with what I saw in church. So for me, did God become non-existent? I don't know. I think at a minimum he became something very detached, something not particularly interested, at least in my family. So that happened. So I want to talk a little bit about my siblings, and then I'll move into more of my drinking. I think it's significant that I was introduced to a variety of intoxicants by the time I was 14 or 15 years old by my older siblings, from straight up marijuana to Thai stick to opium, powder cocaine, hallucinogenics, sedative hypnotics. A lot of you have probably heard of Quaaludes. So I was introduced to really a plethora of stuff when I was really quite young. And because, the family that plays together stays together, right? That's what we believed. We didn't know that this seemingly innocent drug use, and alcohol was involved as well, would end up tearing us asunder, almost killing some of us. So there's that little piece of information. Now I just want to spend a little time talking about my own personal drinking history. And my recollection is that I was 13 years old. My sister Ruth might say I was a couple years older, but we're just going to go with my version tonight. I was sitting alone at home. Everyone was out. And I remember what I was wearing. I was wearing a little white checked cotton shirt with blue lace-trimmed pants. So this is how I'm attired at age 13, looking younger than my stated age, by the way. I wasn't voluptuous then. I'm not voluptuous today either. I looked young for my age. So anyway, I just decide, my parents drink, maybe they have a drink once a year. I mean, I'm not being raised in an alcoholic family. My mother needed a drink, or at least a Xanny bar, right? But I was too young to recognize that I needed to go procure these items on the street and hand them over to her to settle things down in the house. That never happened. Anyway, I'm just sitting alone, age 13. I know there's a cabinet up high. It's high enough that I have to kneel on the counter to reach the cabinet. I'm not a big person today. I wasn't big then either. And there's brown liquor up there, and it's Cutty Sark and some kind of bourbon. And I pull those bottles down and pour probably not that much into a glass. I'd never drunk, as far as I know, never drunk alcohol before, except a sip of beer at the barbecue hut, with my dad. And probably in a sort of a highball glass, I poured, what would that be? 3 fingers, 4 ounces. And I drank it all by myself, and it was great. I'm all by myself, and suddenly I am just delighted with the world. I'm running around, I'm cracking up, all by myself. I choose to run outdoors around and around the house, also cracking up, laughing out loud. And my sister comes home with some friends, and this is terrible, I'm out of control. And so they're pushing me in the shower, trying to straighten me up. I don't think they gave me coffee. My point in bringing that up is the first time I got drunk, I drank alone. And I was just a kid with no really solid experience in drinking alcohol yet. As far as my general alcohol story after that, for the longest time, from the time I did go to college, that was a great privilege. I even went to graduate school, another great privilege, with support from my family and also, student loans and such. I did carry some of the financial burden. And I don't know why I brought that up. Just don't be thinking that it was all just handed to me. So when I was in college, I went to a rigorous college. I went to a very rigorous graduate school. After graduate school, I had what you'd call internships and residencies that were progressively more rigorous. So it's either good news or bad news. My alcoholism failed to progress at an appropriate rate. I couldn't be one of these guys in the room here tonight who got sober at 22 because he was that drunk at 18. I didn't have that good fortune. That's just not my story. I was sufficiently mature isn't the right word, I don't think. I don't believe I was mature. I think I was a pretty broken, inwardly sick young lady. But I had a work ethic. And this work ethic kept me drinking only like after exams, or only after like really important times, like maybe a cool football game. Certainly not in college or in graduate school. I did not keep alcohol in my home. I went and procured it. This was a time when I was a bar drinker. I went and procured it in bars, preferably with the addition of a little powder cocaine. That was my favorite combination. Then you can drink more, right? Sometimes that was available. At that time, I was sort of a bar drinker. So we'd go out as a group to the bars and drink in that fashion. And some of the time, I would get really drunk, and sometimes not so much. I seemed to have a much higher tolerance for alcohol than some of my peers. Did I sometimes throw up? Yeah, that happened. That was more of a high school thing. Speaking of high school, I think it was intriguing that we'd have these keg parties in people's backyards, and the parents would be home. I'm just sure they were home, and they were just ignoring us, getting drunk in their backyard. So I sort of grew up in this alcoholic town called Jacksonville, Florida, where drinking among young people, including underage people, was really encouraged. And then when you got into the social scene, I was not a blue blood, but I got invited to those blue bloods parties, debutante parties and such. The bar was the main event. And it didn't matter whether you were, 4'8" or 6'8", you were welcome at the bar. And so I really learned that alcoholic overconsumption was okay. I learned that from that alcoholic community there. So anyway, and I guess I should confess to the occasional blackout. I never ended up in a place that surprised me. I generally woke up in my own bedroom at home. If I woke up at a neighbor's house, like I had a girlfriend that I drank with quite a bit. Her parents had a very well-stocked liquor cabinet. I knew where I was and I knew how I got there. So my really severe alcoholism came much later, so I won't spend much more time on that except to say that hard work, first in school and career, And then in pregnancy and childbirth and childbearing, my alcoholism kept getting pushed back. My date of severe alcohol excess kept getting delayed until I was probably in my late 30s. And it was around my late 30s, the kids were a little older, they were more self-sufficient. I would go to work. I was fortunate to have a job that didn't require much in the way of nighttime call or weekend work. So I would, get up really early, do the drill, get the kids off to school, go to work, get my work done. Sometimes that was stressful. Come home and immediately start preparing a meal, except that before I would remove any food from the refrigerator, I would fill my favorite wine glass. It was pale green plastic, and it had some little cracks in it because I'd been using it for so long, but I loved that wine glass. And I would fill it, and yes, I would fill it from a box of wine. And boxes of wine are very dangerous. I remember the day that I went to get more wine out of my wine box, and it was dripping empty. And I mean, I was stunned. Did I drink like almost 3 liters of wine in the past 36 to 48 hours? In less time than that, it really startled me. It startled me so much that the next day I called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and they could have helped me. I knew it. I knew it as soon as I walked in. These people can help me. So I ran home to my spouse, and I haven't told you anything about my spouse. He was a lot like my mother, which is not a compliment. I went home to my spouse, and I said, these people can help me stop drinking. And he forbade me to return. He did not want me to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. No further explanation. I went back one time to tell the people my husband was forbidding me to return, and they were just horrified. They must have thought I was brain dead. That was my first venture into Alcoholics Anonymous. My husband told me I should call him. He could be my sponsor. Right. I should call him if I had an urge to drink. Needless to say, that didn't go very well. And over the next couple of years, my alcoholism did begin to escalate. It began to affect my work product. My mental health was, because of this extremely tense, toxic relationship with my spouse that had been ongoing pretty much since day one of our relationship. I was sort of crumbling into what what's her name, Melody Beatty would call, like codependent crisis. Everything I felt, everything I did depended upon what was emanating from my spouse. I had no boundaries. I had no life of my own. So I was really deteriorating psychologically, mentally, at the same time that I was becoming more and more drunk, which is a bad combination. So I ended up in treatment for the first time in about 2003. I had awoken from a drunken stupor at home. I had taken leave from work for depression. I was very depressed. I'm not making fun of depression. Believe me, I've experienced it. I'm not making fun of mental illness, but I wasn't going to tell him it was because I was knee walking drunk. But I awakened from a drunken stupor at about 3 p.m. just in time to carry my children to their karate lesson. Thank goodness. I mean, I am 3 sheets to the wind. So I get into the Ford Expedition and load my kids in, and they're maybe 8 and 10, something like that. Anyway, I get to the karate place, and I step outside to wait for them. I trip over my own feet, fall onto my face, give myself a black eye, and kind of mess up my glasses. And then I drove them home. Fortunately, it was only about a mile from the house. And what I did when I got home was to immediately begin making dinner, because this is what I did. This is how I justified my existence. And my husband walks into me with a black eye, scratched up glasses, visibly easily from across the room, very impaired. And the next day I ended up in my first treatment center. Sierra Tucson, out in Tucson, high-end, expensive, expect a miracle. They taught the 12-step program. I didn't really get the 12-step program. I came out of that treatment center to enter my longest period of sobriety, which was just over 6 years, while I was still married. And as I analyze that recovery, and I've looked at it quite a bit, and it is kind of funny how we look at ourselves. But self-knowledge matters. It doesn't keep us sober, but it matters. And I've needed to do this examination, this self-examination, to understand myself better and understand where I've gone off the rails. So I had a sponsor who was wonderful, deeply spiritual, wanted to show me a spiritual path. But I didn't get it. We read the big book together. She came to my house. And we'd sit in my dining room and read this big book. And I'm like, what's happening here? We went to Sabino Canyon, a beautiful area, to read the third step prayer together. And I'm like, okay, I'm just not getting it at all. And I think that even though I did the steps, you can take the steps from your heart and soul. You can process them as thoroughly as you can, really chew them up, really take them on as your armor. And I was just sort of detached from the steps. I went through the process. I could do a fourth step without being involved in the fourth step. I hope I'm making some sense here. I was really avoiding the steps while I was filling out pages and pages with personal writing. So it wasn't really that much of a surprise when I did eventually relapse. And the other thing that was a reality in that first recovery, and another flaw in it, in myself, is that all I really wanted was that marriage, that house, those children, my profession. Anything else? What am I leaving out? The cars. We didn't have great cars, but still they were cars. Just the material world is what I wanted to hold on to. I'm like the Buddhists. I'm grasping and clinging for the material world that is not going to save me. And it doesn't save me. And in the end, I end up having a relapse that begins to cost me everything. Again, I have to leave my job. Not the first time I've had to leave my job. I find that when I leave my job, I have a lot more free time to drink, and my drug of choice becomes vodka. So I'm drunk a lot. Asleep in the morning when the spouse leaves, wake up, maybe it's 9 or 10 a.m., and of course I'm going to start the day with a few slugs of vodka. So my alcoholism just explodes as my responsibilities outside the house diminish. My kids are more self-sufficient. They're not that self-sufficient, but I'm drinking vodka anyway. And my alcoholism just takes off. I'm hiding vodka everywhere. I remember I ended up on a locked psych ward for intense suicidal ideation. There was this jagged mountain precipice, and I wanted to jump off that mountain precipice, and I knew what I was going to wear and everything. So they put me in the psych ward for suicidal ideation. While I was in there, It was like Thanksgiving time, and my husband happened to open this big turkey roaster we had, and inside the turkey roaster were all these empty bottles of, I guess they were half-pint bottles of vodka. Quite a few fit in there. And he mentions this to me when he comes to visit me at the hospital, and I'm like, well, I didn't drink them all at once. That was about my best comeback. Anyway, things like that happened. And, you know, my marriage just began to fail. I was seeing psychiatrists and therapists for a long, long time. I was, you know, giving them partial information. Mostly, I think I was ragging on my spouse. People were trying to get me to stand up to my spouse. None of these things were working. Anyway, in the end,
Sorry.
thank you. In the end, I have a real phobia. I think that was a big roach. I'm quite afraid of them. Yeah, if you want to control me, put me on one of those Survivor shows and fill a vat with palmetto bugs and make me get into it. I will be psychotic in half a minute. But anyway, about this drinking, it began to cost me things. Like my marriage, my relationship with my children. I made a decision to give up my profession. It was the only way I knew I could make amends to all the people I might have harmed for working with them when I was impaired. So in the couple of years after, I would say the couple of years after my husband kicked me out of the house, sent me to, as an interim measure, sent me to a 90-day treatment facility in a tiny town in Arizona. I loved that treatment facility. I was safe there for a whole 90 days. I remember when it got to 45 days, I had a panic attack because I only had 45 days left in the treatment center, and I didn't know what I was going to do after that. Well, what I did after that was get sober and get drunk, and get sober and get drunk. It was a very dark year. People from I was going to AA meetings in this small town, Casa Grande, and people were good to me. And if I were staying sober, they'd let me come stay in their guest room. But then I would drink. And then I would go. It seemed like it was the Best Western. Was it always the Best Western? I don't know. Maybe sometimes it was just the Best Western. We'll just stick with that. Anyway, I'd go to the Best Western armed with I don't know, four of those flat bottles, those flat plastic bottles of Popov vodka. I love them because they fit conveniently certainly in the bottom of the handbag I'm carrying tonight. No problem, no one ever knows. You can slip off to the bathroom and take a slug anytime. But I would go into these hotel rooms, I would tell housekeeping, please don't disturb me. And I'd have a little bit of Gatorade and a lot of vodka. And I would just be basically passed out drunk the entire time. And that was a pretty dark time. I never got assaulted, I never got robbed, I never got raped. It's kind of amazing because I would be so drunk walking out of the room to smoke a cigarette, because that's what I did when I was drunk, and no one ever whomped me upside the head. I actually had a fair amount of jewelry in my possession, and not one piece of that jewelry ever went missing. I remember one time, and I thought this was funny, and I'm going to get to recovery pretty quick now. But I thought this was funny. I was in the Best Western, because that's where I went, and it was dark in the room, and I needed to use the bathroom. So I walked into the bathroom and shut the door behind me. So it's pitch black. I can't see everything. I can't see anything. And I'm very, very intoxicated. So I'm trying to find this door handle. I mean, this is like a 5 by 5 foot area perhaps, and I'm banging on the walls and I'm reaching and tugging, and I couldn't get out of this 5 by 5 foot bathroom. I was actually afraid that somebody was going to hear the banging and call the police, thinking that I was being, beaten. But then I realized no one cared. No one cared enough to call the police. And needless to say, I eventually got out of the bathroom. A couple of other asides, I was a falling down drunk. I remember falling on my face in a hotel room and hearing the cartilage in my nose crack. I think what had happened is I passed out. I was standing and suddenly passed out, clonked my jaw on a countertop, went down, must have been down for an hour at least, because when I awakened, I couldn't really move my right side. I figured, oh well, I've had a stroke, no big deal. I just dragged myself to the bed and somehow get on it. It turned out that it was fortunate that I woke up, because you can do a lot of damage if you stay on one side for too long, but everything had just fallen asleep. I mean, so things like this happened. I took pictures of the bruise. It's so amazing I didn't break my jaw. I took pictures of that bruise because I knew if I had a picture of that bruise, I would never drink again. And I was mistaken. Anyway, my pattern, I'm going to switch over to recovery now. I've got a few minutes left, and I don't have to talk the whole time. My pattern after episodes like that was to get sober. My sister got me from Arizona to Wilmington. I lived in halfway houses there. I lived in one halfway house for like 3 years and stayed sober. But why did they let me stay for 3 years? It's too long to be in a halfway house community. I mean, I wasn't thriving. I was smoking a lot of cigarettes, but I wasn't thriving. Eventually I drank again. So that was my pattern. And I ended up in Southern Pines by the grace of God, and at the Bethany House by the grace of God, and was sober again for about 3 years. Before I let ordinary life events, really difficult yet ordinary life events, bring me to my knees with just permanent panic attack. If my eyes were open, I was terrified. Everything was wrong. I was telling everybody. And then one night I said, I've got to go drink. And I did. And it started a pattern of relapse that lasted at least 3.5, if not 4 years, where I would get sober and this was fairly recent. This was, like, say this started 5 years ago, or 4.5 years ago. And I would get sober for 3 or 9 or even 12 months, and you guys would watch me come and pick up the white chips because I couldn't sustain it. And, I just, I hadn't truly surrendered to the God of my understanding. I hadn't really even worked out who that was. I needed to learn from you guys, and I'd begun to learn from you guys when I was at the Bethany House. These women used to bring in this big book study. There would be like 7 or 8 women from the outside with we Bethany House residents sitting around this big table, and they're taking time out of their lives to get to the Bethany House and to open this book and to read it to us faithfully every week so that we can get through the whole dang thing. And I realized as I was experiencing that was love. And as I experienced that love, I began to understand the God of my understanding. That he, at least I could start out with his being love, his being something emanating from this group of drunks, like the one I'm talking to now, good orderly direction, whatever you want to call it. I think I've described enough how powerless I was over alcohol. Clearly your life is unmanageable when you get trapped in a 5 by 5 foot bathroom at the Best Western. And this time when I went through this, so I made my way back to primary purpose. I'm just going to mention that. And that was, about a year ago when I finally found myself prepared to really do this deal. In the interim, I'd had a couple of DUIs. They were a few years apart. In those 3.5 to 4 years, I went through 4 detoxes. 2 I did at home, which was very thrilling, all by myself. I mean, what a trip. I'll describe it to you if you want to hear about it. I did a couple of detoxes in the hospital because I was just too sick to stay at home. So, I mean, things were pretty unmanageable. I don't think I have to talk about step 1 anymore. But this time, especially when I did 4 through 9, I did them from my heart. I mean, from the bottom of my stomach, from my soul. It wasn't just a rote intellectual exercise as it had been in the past. People would say to me, Merilyn, you're relapsing. Where are things going wrong? Is it your step 4, or is your step 4 incomplete? Is it step 3? Have you just not surrendered to God? In the end, it was always just about step 1. Because once I've got a bottle in my hand, I'm coping with step 1. It really wasn't very complicated at all. I slid all the way back to step 1. I think step 6 and 7 are maybe the most important growth steps that I've experienced in terms of really opening up to God and what He has to offer me. Really letting go. I mean, I had this hard little nugget of a heart, and I would have insisted that that weren't the case. But I'm sure that that's what my heart had become over all those years. Could I behave with grace? Yes. I could imitate people who had grace. Could I behave with compassion? Absolutely. I could imitate people who had compassion. But it never went all the way down, to the soles of my feet and the tips of my toes. I was always practicing good things from this empty cistern that was really dry as a bone. And you just can't do God's work from an empty cistern. I had to let God fill me up. And I think steps 6 and 7 were just a huge part of that. And of course 8 and 9, which I've practiced quite completely, I believe, were just a great release to become a citizen. I mean, for me, the steps were sort of like, today I'm a citizen. I go out into the world and I do good works. Sure, I think of myself as I get up in the morning and I shower or drink a cup of coffee or even go to do my morning meditation. It's, it's kind of about me and God, but still I'm involved. But in the rest of the day, you guys have taught me that I can do a whole lot of things that are outside of me. And that can be simply showing kindness in the world. It can be using the traditions to be an effective member in the workplace or in a family. It can be just a simple service that we do from this meeting. I go to detox. Sometimes I take a Zoom meeting to ladies in detention. I have some sponsees. I didn't mention earlier, but I have a sponsor who has a sponsor. I guess I should have mentioned that. Did I even mention my sobriety date? I think I might have. Anyway, ask me after the meeting if you don't remember my sobriety date. So today I can wake up with 1, 2, and 3 and run my day by 10, 11, and 12. And, becoming a prayerful person is all new to me. I would say that having that idea of prayerfulness with me throughout the day is really new and it's really soothing, and it just keeps my shoulders relaxed. I'm, wearing the world like that loose garment. designed by some haute couture guy in France or something. I have an empty mind. When I came up, that sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? But when I came up to speak tonight, there was nothing in my head. There was no chatter. I wasn't fretting. I wasn't trying to think of how I was going to get this all out. I was really just thinking about wanting to tell my story in a complete fashion so that you could really understand I'm a real alcoholic, and if I drink again, I'm in big trouble. If I follow the steps in the program, well, AA got me to God. I'll just say that one more time. AA got me to God, and that has been my saving grace. I was absolutely beyond human aid on many occasions, should have been dead or maimed or something on many occasions. I was spared all of that. I guess to be here today, to be speaking to you, just to be sharing my journey. And I don't think I have anything to say. I didn't really mention step 12 specifically, but I think what I'm talking about is my own personal spiritual awakening, which has simply come through properly working these steps. And I've needed a lot of help along the way from a lot of you. So thanks a lot for paying attention, and I'm going to end a few minutes early because I've said enough. Thanks a lot.